Hi, boys and girls. I hope you've had a great day. We're going to be continuing to read our Flat Stanley chapter book, The Great Egyptian Grave Robbery. And keep in mind that when we ended last time, we said that chapter 5 was going to be called In the Tomb. Okay, so in the tomb, we know we could predict that Flat Stanley was going to go inside the tomb. So here's the illustration for this chapter. Stanley found that no matter how many humps a camel may have, riding one was no joking matter. The camel lurched. Stanley slipped. The camel bumped. Stanley slid. He finally solved the problem by folding himself over its hump like a blanket. At last, the caravan came to a stop. Stanley fell to the ground and looked up and up. Somehow, pyramids had always looked a bit smaller in pictures. Sir Hawara brought Stanley around to the back and then lit a torch and handed it back to him. He pointed to a space just a few inches wide between two enormous stone blocks. Remember, find the scrolls and then unlock the tomb. No dilly-dallying. Stanley stared at the dark slot between the stones. He didn't think it looked like a place he would want to be dilly-dallying. He didn't think it looked like a place he would want to do anything in fact. But he reminded himself that this was an important archaeological expedition, and a promise was a promise. He took a deep breath and wedged himself in to the passageway. So here's the illustration. "3 inches is not very much room to get around in. Stanley had to half wriggle and half slide as he took little sideways hops just to inch along slowly. After many twists and turns in the deepest darkness, he heard a leathery flapping. He felt a rush of wind as if from a great many wings. He held up his torch, and then out of the gloom, bats. Hundreds of them, thousands perhaps. Stanley had disturbed a whole colony of bats, and they were coming right for him. Now, boys and girls, I don't know if you remember this, but Mrs. Quinn does not like bats. I'm really afraid of them. He felt himself break into a cold sweat and a new set of goose discs. So remember, instead of goose bumps, they call them goose discs because Flat Stanley's flat. So he doesn't get bumps, he gets discs. As the bats approached, Stanley leaped up and pressed himself against the stone wall, and he stuck there. The goose discs on his arms and legs, in combination with the cold sweat, had become little suction cups. Stanley hung perfectly still, pressed tight to the pyramid wall like a starfish, until the entire flock of bats had passed by. Then, as his fears subsided, the little goose disc suction cups let go, one by one. Thwop, 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 and he slipped gently to the ground again. Okay, so here is a picture of just a little swarm of the bats. Stanley was badly shaken, but he knew he must go on. He took one sideways step and then another and another. Just as he was beginning to give up hope of ever finding the tomb, the passageway opened up into an arched entryway. Stanley held up his torch and gasped. He had been in several extremely fancy elevators before, so he was no stranger to beautiful places. But this was something else indeed. Bejeweled carvings of dogs and snakes guarded the entryway. Gilded urns lined the walls. In the center of the room sat a large casket made of gold, and on top of that lay a life-size alabaster statue of King Khufufu. Okay, so here's the picture of him entering. There's the arched entryway. There was no doubt about it. Stanley had discovered the tomb of the great pharaoh, and flanking the coffin on golden pedestals were 2 enormous scrolls. So flanking means like standing on each side. There were 2 enormous scrolls. He had done it. He had found the priceless giant scrolls of papyrus. Now to find the secret exit. Stanley stepped into the tomb and began to search. The walls were covered with hieroglyphs and beautiful painted scenes. But there was no door. The only thing that seemed out of place was a large button at the far end of the tomb. Once again, Clancy's jealous because I'm paying attention to you readers, first graders, instead of him. The button seemed strangely to call to him. You're being rude. The buttons seemed strangely to call to him, as if it were saying, "Press me, press me." Stanley did press it. A panel swung open to reveal a full-sized passageway. Stanley stepped out to explore and held up his torch. Surely this was the passageway Sir Hawara had talked about, the one the burial party must have used. But the passageway split just ahead, and from there, Stanley could see that each branch split again. How would he know which way to go out? And then he noticed something. At each intersection, a life-size hieroglyph was painted on the wall. What if they were painted facing a certain way to give directions, like the ones in the National Museum? And that is the end of chapter 5. That's the only one we're going to read tonight. Chapter 6 is called Clancy. That's not what it's called. It's called A Bad Surprise. So I don't know what that's going to be. Boys and girls, I want to show you something before I sign off for the night. I want you to notice something. These have been in my kitchen on the table since June 17th. June 17th, if you remember, is the day that all of you came to drop things off or to pick things up. Remember, that's the day that I give you your reread bags. You came through and I was outside under the tent. And on that day, Bailey gave me these flowers, and can you believe these flowers are still just as beautiful as the day she gave them to me? So I wanted to show these, that they are still looking great. I haven't changed the water because I'm afraid if I do, they're gonna die. So I just keep the water the same, and for some reason, it's working. So I love how they look, and I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you, Bailey. And thank you all, boys and girls. I miss you tons. I hope you're doing well, and I will see you soon for our next read aloud. Bye-bye.